Okay, well, again, welcome everybody. Absolutely delighted to have Moira Edwards with me. As many of you know, she's president of Ellipsis Partners, a leading provider of technology consulting services to the professional credentialing community. Our agenda today is simple. We'll spend about 20 to 25 minutes. Moira and I will have a brief conversation about the importance of the user experience and usability testing. And then we will open it up to 5 to 10 minutes of questions from you, our online audience. And please note, everybody will get a copy of the video recording of this event in the next day or two, and we will also provide a transcript. So without any further ado, it is my very great pleasure to welcome you to the show, Moira. And if you could just kick things off, please just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so interested in the user experience and usability testing.
Absolutely. Malcolm, thanks for having me on. This is a great chance to talk about something that I'm really interested in. And, I'm not, or we're not providers of usability testing or user experience design, but we are consumers. And I just like to see good design in software, right? I started my career as a software developer in Ireland many years ago. But, I think it became real for me sometime later. I was in the US and I was working at an association, and we developed custom software for our members. And it was working with them that helped me see that good software design gives members value. Their experience of what we were providing in the technology enhance their satisfaction with the service, and then ultimately with the association. So, sometimes they would come to us and they would, sorry, I'm going to talk on a minute about this, but they would ask for changes, right? And we were always really careful not to make any changes that they asked for kind of be cobbled on little bits and pieces, like an old Victorian house with stairways to nowhere and lots of little additions. We always wanted the software to make sense, and that any additions were part of an elegant solution. So that's what I still like seeing in all that we do with technology, is software that works well and makes sense to the user.
And I don't know how many of our viewers are familiar with the Victorian houses that you and I are familiar with from England and Ireland, but hopefully a few. So this really then is all about making the software better?
Yes, it's also though about avoiding disaster. So I came to this the hard way. When I was with that association, we had a dreadful software issue. So we developed this program that we offered associations, our members. And we had a brand new interface, and it had lots of cool elements, little pop-up windows. But our constituents who were trying to use it got completely confused by the interface. And all of these pop-ups really impacted performance, and it brought the system to its knees, and the server crashed. And so our launch of this software was a complete failure. And our president and CEO, whenever he would talk to like the CEO of a member organization, would have to start the conversation by saying, "I'm really sorry about that software failure." And when he stood up at our annual meeting and he stood up to give his address, he had to start by saying, "I first want to say how sorry I am about that software issue." So, when that happened, we brought in usability experts, and we did testing, and we had constituents try out the software, and we found out that we had developed it badly. Like it was smug. It was kind of full of itself and all its little twiddly bits, and it really wasn't about the people who were going to use it, right? And so that was the lesson we learned, right? That technology is about the people, not just the functionality. And when we forget that, we can be in for a fall.
So really, I think, if I paraphrase that, you're saying the user experience is important, but fundamentally it's secondary to the function of the system. It has to be actually usable, and you've got to be able to use it to complete the functions it's designed for.
Right. So there's two priorities there. And sometimes in technology, in IT, we think that the functionality is king. And, we're not far off the mark. But we work an awful lot with nonprofits on their certification management systems, on their association management systems, right? And I have seen great systems with lots of functionality and lots of features get thrown out because the staff in the end could not use it. They couldn't find all the data for constituents' history. They couldn't run a query, pull the people they needed to get. You know, they couldn't generate a report that actually met their needs. And what happens is, you know, people, they try to fix it. Like they offer training, maybe IT tries to maybe take on writing the reports. But ultimately, a system like that slows everyone down and it makes the organization inefficient. And staff complain, right? And ultimately, senior management hear about all this complaining and they respond. And ultimately, that system, no matter how fully functional it is, will get turfed out because it's not usable. So I think it's important that we recognize how important usability is before we get ourselves caught in that morass, that pit of unusable software.
Now, I'm not sure if it's just me, but you were coming through a little bit of interference on the audio there on that last.
Okay, and I'm actually hearing you a little bit of interference. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change to a different pair of headphones because that sometimes addresses the problem.
All right, and apologies to folks. I think literally every person in the world, certainly my two children in the next room, are all using Zoom. So I think we're putting a pretty heavy burden on the internet here. I've definitely had some issues with Zoom in the last few months that I've never had before. Although you're coming through loud and clear now.
Okay. I have changed from wireless to wired. It's amazing how often that solves the problem, even in this day and age.
It's a little bit better. It's still breaking up a little bit, but let's press on. So are you saying that a system has to have a cool interface to succeed?
So I wouldn't say that it has to have a cool interface so much as it has to have a thoughtful interface, like that the design is empathetic and intentional, that it comes from a thoughtful process. I think, you know, a company designing an interface has to be willing to gather context and understand how the software will be used during development, and then in testing, just be willing to listen and to change it. So, but let me just check with the people who are listening on the call right now, whether you can hear me okay, and whether you can hear Malcolm okay. Maybe you to go ahead and write in the chat again, right? Because I can talk all day, but people will not like it.
So Marcy can hear us both well. So I think we're in good shape. And again, folks, not only will we share the video, but we also have a transcript, and we'll share both of those. So I'm glad that at least, James can hear us clearly as well. So I think we're in good shape, Maura. I think we will press on. Thank you, both of you, for the feedback. Apparently much better with your headphones, Maura. So there's a piece of feedback there. All right, so if I'm one of the folks that's listening and, you know, maybe I've got an association management system, maybe I've got a certification management system, I've got a website, I am trying to provide a cohesive experience for my users, and I want to make user experience a priority. If I want to focus on user experience, how do I go about that? Is there a process? Is there some steps that I need to go through?
Well, I think the first thing is that there's different levels that you can take it to. I mean, you could start with a do-it-yourself, a DIY approach, and at the most basic, you can have your staff just sitting with your constituents, seeing how they use the software, maybe doing that at a meeting, you know, at one of your conferences when we have conferences again. You can also do it yourself with online tools that track how people use a certain menu structure or a certain page layout. So again, you can do that yourself, subscribe to the tools, and it's not hard. And then I think you can take it a next step up with professional services. What we often see is that if you're getting a new website done or something new developed, that your web development company will have user experience analysts on staff, and they often want to understand your personas, people who are coming to the website. They want to understand their user journey. And so hopefully at that stage, they're baking usability in from the beginning. And then there are people that you can call that just come in and do testing and do assessment and give you a lot of recommendations for improvement. So there's many ways you can do it. I think no matter what you do, the main thing is to identify where your constituents are feeling the pain, because we don't always know it, right? I was talking recently, we were doing interviews with some members of an association that we're working with, and two of them showed me software that's in common use. It's like an online community. And in all fairness, and this association had given them a lovely website, and then when they logged in, they had a lovely member dashboard that directs them to all these different places, and then they clicked there and they went off to the online community. And these were all best of breed tools. They looked well, but once they were in the community, they clicked on home and it went to the homepage of the community, not the homepage of the member dashboard and not the homepage of the website. And they didn't know where they were. But it was so interesting to see them get lost within what we maybe as technologists might think was a perfectly clear suite of tools. So it's so illuminating to have our constituents share a screen for 5 minutes even, so that we get some sense of how difficult it is for them from their perspective.
Yeah, I think that's an outstanding point. I call those points of friction. And I think when we chatted earlier about this, I told you the story about Intuit when they first were developing some of their home finance software. They would literally, back in the day when people took discs home and installed on their PCs, they would pay people to follow them home and just sit there quietly and see where they get stuck. Because when we design our systems, and when we design perhaps a user journey, a user flow that goes from the website to system A to system B, we of course assume they will take the path, I call it the happy path, that we want them to take. And you're right, if you just sit there quietly, it's amazing what people will do that you couldn't possibly anticipate. And I think that's an absolutely superb idea, particularly when you're integrating 2 or 3 different systems that your user has to go through in concert to achieve something. To just sit and watch them and see where those points of friction are so that you can try and smooth those out is a fantastic idea. So if somebody wants to do their own usability, I mean, we talked about there's different ways to doing this, and of course you can go all the way up to professional services. But if somebody just wants to get started on their own, is that hard to do?
No, it's actually not hard at all. You know, when I was a staffer within a nonprofit, we went to our conference. We invited members to come into a room. We set up for 30-minute time slots, and we had them come in and complete a series of tasks. And the main thing is that you don't give them any hints about how to complete it. You just set them a task. Like maybe you ask them to find a recent article on health insurance changes. And you sit back and you see what that leads them to do. Or you say, register for a webinar that's happening next month. And you let them just find their way through the site. And then if you're doing that in person, then you ask them to talk out loud about what they're thinking where they're looking and where they're searching for things. And then the staff member takes notes. The online tools are fabulous, though. I mean, they are a really good way to do it. One that we've used a lot, though you could Google others, is called Optimal Workshop. And, you know, they have one tool which is for testing menu structure. So if you ask somebody to find something, it tracks where they click and where their mouse goes and how long it takes them to find the thing. If you ask them to find something on a particular page layout, it'll do a heat map of where people put their mouse, and then it aggregates that data and reports on it for you. So it's really good. You know, we, in the certification world and exams, we typically test our questions, right, before we let them loose to be real questions that are scored. And if we're in marketing, we test our emails before we send them out. Maybe we do A/B testing. But I just think that sometimes we don't test our software after launch in the real life situations in which it will be used, because we just are so concerned in getting it out there, right? But it's such a powerful thing to do.
Yeah, I've actually, and in fact, I think one of the things that we should do, Moira, is let's compile a little list of some of these tools and include it in the transcript. Because I've certainly used some in the past. I know that actually here at Certemy, we use a couple of tools that do give us a heat map of how people are using the platform. So when we roll out new features, we can quickly see if they're being adopted or not. And if they're not being adopted, it's either an education issue. We do send out little how-to videos every time we launch new features. But if it's not an education issue, then it's a usability issue. And so that will cause us to take a look at the software and say, well, maybe the button or the link that they're supposed to click to complete a process or a task is just not that obvious. So yeah, let's include a list of those tools. I've certainly used them as well. I've even used a tool that does exactly what you described, where somebody completes a task with no guidance from you and they verbalize the process. So the task might be log in, and they're like looking at the screen and saying, well, I'm looking for the login button, and oh, there it is. And so that verbalization, I think, is a key part of that process as well. And you're absolutely right. If you can't get somebody to do it for you in person, you can pay complete strangers to do it online for you. And it's really good information. So let's talk about off-the-shelf software. Should folks expect that it's been designed from scratch for a good user experience? Shouldn't that be their expectation when they get new off-the-shelf software?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in that good software would be intentionally designed from the ground up to be usable, but we mess with that software all the time. You know, that we put maybe a certification application process on top of it. We put a renewal process, and the steps that we put into it can impact the flow that the user experiences. And I think as well, where things can get dangerous is that we're all using platform-based solutions like Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics, right? And so when we customize those and we build these screens, we have our developers building screens, and these are not necessarily usability experts. So they also change how things work. So I think whenever we do that, after we've made these changes, we need to make sure that our constituents can navigate them successfully. You know, because our members, our constituents have an expectation that things are intuitive, that they're user-friendly, right? But that's not a universal standard. There isn't, like you can make things better, but like all of us, we didn't know how to use an iPhone until, you know, we kind of tried a few things and we followed the tutorial and maybe people showed us stuff. So we don't know what we don't know, right? So our members just may not know the things that are obvious to us. So the knowledge that we gain from observing them, I think it gives us insight into so much that's important to our members. You know, design thinking, that model for generating or developing products that are really meet the needs of the consumer, that starts with observing and with empathy. And when I was in a nonprofit, we did site visits to visit our member institutions to observe them in their daily work, so we would understand what the kind of environment they were working in. So, and I can't emphasize enough that the time we spend observing how our constituents interact with our technology is just so well spent. It really is valuable.
Yeah, and I think your point's well taken with, for example, the iPhone. I've been using iPhone since they came out, so whatever that is, 11, 12 years. You know, when I pick up an Android phone, I struggle a little bit. Even though the apps are ostensibly the same, the interface is slightly different. And you're right, we develop an assumption on how things should work based on the software systems that we're using most frequently, right? You know, we use HubSpot as our marketing and sales system and customer support system here. It works very differently, and is actually a lot easier to use than Salesforce, which I used at my last company. But it does, it kind of trains the pathways in your brain. And I do think that one of the things that people can do, you talked about being trained how to do something. If you've got a user experience, it requires you to go from the website to an AMS to a certification management system, actually producing how-to videos that shows people that complete journey from start point to middle point to end point is really helpful. You can obviously observe people and see if they can figure it out on their own, but obviously anything you can do to proactively present the correct pathway to them and help them avoid making those missteps is probably helpful as well. So I just wanted to mention that. So if somebody's listening in now and they're sold on the value of usability testing and really trying to optimize the user experience for their particular set of constituents, but they're wondering how they can convince executive leadership to make an investment in this process, you know, what advice would you give them there?
If you want to convince your boss and your boss's boss and your board that this is important, I think fear is always the best motivator, right?
Yeah.
But they're not scared of what they don't know about. So your first step is actually to gather data. So maybe you can get a question in your annual member survey or your biannual member survey. Maybe it's even open-ended, that asks about the biggest issues you encounter on our website.
Yeah.
You know, I always used to go to, when I went to our annual meeting, I would sit with people at breakfast and at lunch and just ask them, how do they use the software? How do they, you know, use our website? Any issues they have, anything they'd like improved? And sometimes you get some compelling anecdotes that are really useful.
Yeah.
You know, we'll provide a list of those tools. Some of them are quite cheap. And so you could do maybe a limited test of your website or your application process, maybe with some friends of your association, maybe some people who are on a particular committee, and you get all of them to run through this. And then you can point out what percentage of them can't do the thing that is actually the main thing you're trying to do in your process, right? That's pretty compelling data. Or, you know, you can do a tiny little poll on the website that says, tell us about your online experience. So anything that you can do to gather information that shows the pain that people are going through, I think is really compelling for our senior leadership.
Yeah. In fact, on those topics, there are tools, and they are very inexpensive. They won't work across systems, but certainly you can embed them in your website. And people listening have probably seen these. These are just like little one-question surveys, and they will literally just pop up in the bottom right corner of your screen, and they'll just ask you a question. Are you having any difficulty navigating this website? What are you here for? Are you having any challenges getting the information you need? Those are very inexpensive. You can completely define the cadence or the frequency in terms of how often they might interrupt the user experience to make sure they don't become a nuisance. And the other thing that I have done, you know, I've built many software systems in the past, and my wife, I will literally say, here's the system, here's what you should be able to do with it. Please try and do it. And, you know, so every executive leader that you need to convince that maybe the process, the core processes that your constituents need to complete is not as easy as it should be, invite them to ask, you know, their husband, their wife, somebody that they know and trust to just do it and sit down and watch them. And I think that will give them very empirical data as to whether it's a simple experience or not.
And if
so we talked about.
I was going to say, if you have a 17-year-old son, he will go through, not just tell you how to do it, but he will code it better. So.
and if it's your son, hopefully at a reasonable rate. So talking about a reasonable rate, so we've talked a lot about some of the DIY options. If somebody wants to turn to a professional and really get some professional help doing this kind of testing and optimization, give us a ballpark idea of how much that might cost.
You know, it's not cheap, but it's so well worth it. Like, I would think that if I was bringing in a company maybe to develop a new website or a new application, and I want them to think about maybe generating personas, user personas, and doing some journey mapping, that's probably going to add about $20,000 to the cost of the project. And that would be a starting point. I would see it being probably even more if they were to do, honest to God, focus groups for you, some more testing. So it would probably be north of that figure, $20,000. And that's why the do-it-yourself versions are so attractive. The tool that we use is maybe $200 a month for a whole range of tools. And you can subscribe for 1 month and then stop. So that you've only invested, you know, for 1 month, you get all your testing done, and then you turn it off till the next time you need to do it next year. And also, you know, doing it yourself at the conference, you just need to get staff to the conference, and hopefully they're already going. And you just need to cajole a room out of your meeting staff, right? So that you can set it up for some testing. And if you're doing that, I mean, ideally, right, the first year at your conference, you might do a bit of a focus group and have people come in and talk about what they want to see in this new website or application online. And then the second year, you might then do usability testing. That'd be the best way to do it with staff.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think professional help is always great, but it doesn't come cheap. And in this particular arena, there's just so much you can do by simply sitting down users and just watching them and see where they get stuck. I mean, that'll solve 90% of your usability issues for you. And I also wanted to point out that many of your vendors are probably like us, and they're probably using a tool internally just to basically track heat maps of usage and understand where people are using the software, where they're leaving the software, usually because they're frustrated they can't complete a task. So I would encourage folks to also talk to their software vendors and ask if any of that information is available for their particular user base. You might be pleasantly surprised, and they may be willing to share that with you. So I did have 2 or 3 other questions, Moira, but I'm going to quickly check with our audience, see if they've got any questions, and give them a chance to tap into your knowledge here. So if anybody's got a question at all, at the bottom of the Zoom interface, you should have an option to submit that question. There's a little Q&A box. So if you do have a question for Moira, please go ahead and submit that now. If not, I've got a couple of questions of my own. So let's just wait a couple of seconds. Folks are a little bit shy, Moira. All right, well, let's see. We'll give them time to come back. So we have both talked about software. A user experience has to be both useful and usable. Obviously, useful means it allows them to complete a function, sign up for continuing education, complete an application or a renewal, and so on. But the yin to the yang there, if it's useful, it's got to be usable. Help us understand how to measure usable. What defines a usable interface?
I think measuring it is actually an interesting question, because it's one of those things to a certain extent. You know it when you see it, because it's an interface where it's easy to figure out what I want to do or where to go to do it. Actually, I was looking today, and a great resource for usability to define it and talk about options for it is usability.gov. It's a government website, actually from HHS, and it's really easy to use. It's a very lovely little clear website, usability.gov.
It should be, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think sometimes what's usable can vary, and I'm actually not going to go into that because I want to talk about that a little later. But what I do want to say is when something is not usable, like how do you know, right? Because when we go into an organization, we would go in and sometimes people will be using a cheat sheet to do the same task, even though they do that task every week or every month, right?
Yeah,
so
not a good sign.
No, exactly. Or they call up IT, they try it and then they call up IT or the expert to make sure they did it right because they're not sure. Or they click on something, but they're not sure exactly what will happen, right? And they're a little bit afraid to click. So all of those are like warning signs that your application is not very usable. Or if your members, your constituents, if first of all, they always look in the wrong place for something, then your system's not usable. Or if they're calling you up and you have a large number of people calling up looking for the same information, then your system's not usable. So that's when to me, it's always when you begin to get a sense that there's pain out there, that's when you need to address it, right?
Yeah, and actually I think there's something that we obviously use as a software company that I think a lot of associations and credentialing bodies can use is there's a lot of inexpensive and in some cases free, depending on the volume of usage, tools that allow you to essentially be your own little customer support organization. I think HubSpot has a free version of their customer support system. And these systems allow you to document and tag the types of questions that come in. And to your point about data, you can very quickly, once you start tracking and measuring and organizing the questions and complaints that come in, particularly those that pertain to the system, you'll very quickly see that folks, there's 2 or 3 core tasks that should be easy, that folks should never need to call in and ask about, but they're calling in and asking about, and that becomes a signal for you to go and kind of smooth out that particular rough patch in your systems. And so I would encourage people to do that. And then I think another point that some software vendors don't necessarily think about is they try and reinvent the wheel. There's just so many kind of user interface paradigms that we've all become very familiar with and very used to through the tools that we use on a daily basis, whether it's Outlook or Gmail, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot, that to ever create a behavior that's different from the types of behaviors that are embedded in those systems is just a recipe for disaster. So let me just see, still no questions, Moira. So we are actually a little bit over time. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on before we wrap it up? We can go as long as we like. If folks are unable to stay with us, we'll just keep rolling the camera. We'll keep recording the transcript. So feel free to cover as many additional points as you'd like.
So I just think that one of the founding books on website design and usability was called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, I think it was. Yeah. So the idea is that you are consistent, like, yes, the behaviors that people have learned on other sites, they can use on your website. And so you're not forcing them to adapt to something that you've decided is a cute way to do something. So, there's lots of that that's consistent. Like, the search is always top right and it's a little magnifying glass, maybe binoculars, but more often a magnifying glass. And the logo is top left and you click on that to go back home, right? So there's certain rules. And I think, what we try and do is we can clear away the clutter and streamline it and adhere to those rules. That goes a long way towards making something usable. But even if you do all the things, like say you go and you research usability and you think you know how to design the perfect site, the main thing you have to do at the end is to test it. Because even usability experts don't know what their constituents will actually adapt to and find quite useful or what they'll find annoying. And I've talked with them and they say that you don't always know beforehand what the reaction will be. So, but when you test, you get the first level of satisfaction in usability testing is finding the problems. And then the second satisfaction is fixing them. So it really comes back to no matter what you do, test it to make sure that it works in the real life. And that would be my word of wisdom, right?
Yes, you put it beautifully a little bit earlier. You don't know what you don't know. You've got your own preconceptions on how everything's supposed to work together because you were responsible for making them work together. And it's so easy to test usability, as we've talked about. Literally just put somebody down, give them a task, and see if they're able to complete it quickly and easily. And if they're not, then see where they get stuck and fix the problem, and then just rinse and repeat until every core process that your constituents need to complete, whether it's within a single system or it's moving across 2 or 3 different integrated systems, is a smooth and friction-free process. So I would absolutely echo everything that you've said there. Any closing thoughts at all?
I think those were it. Those were the closing thoughts.
That was it. Those were very good. All right, well, Moira, again, thank you so much. I've loved listening to those dulcet tones for the last 35 minutes as well. Absolute pleasure to not only get your thoughts and insights on usability testing, but lovely to hear your voice as well. So thank you, everybody that stayed with us. Again, I will distribute a video and a transcript of this call. Thank you so much for joining us, Moira. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.
My pleasure.